Hi, and welcome back to this tutorial series about pixel streaming. My name is William Orving, and I work as a technical artist for Epic Games. Now that I've gone through the basics on how to send values from the pixel streaming website and how to later receive those values into Unreal Engine, I wanted to show you how you can add your own interactive elements to your website. It's worth mentioning that as long as there is a descriptor value being sent with JavaScript from the website to the application, you can use about any interactive element. Let's get started with this. How I tend to get started is by looking at a lot of websites to see what kind of interactive elements that I would like to have on my own website. Now, in this case, let's just use a simple range slider to change the camera rotation of the character in the application. So what we can do is just search for HTML slider on Google. I'm using Google Chrome right now as a web browser, and you'll see this really useful website called w3schools.com. Here there is a couple of examples on sliders and how they are created and how they work. Now in this case, I will take this last example with a background property. You can press try it yourself and you'll see that you have the interactive slider that is changed whenever you press it, and there's a value that will be changed. In this case, this value will be sent to our Unreal application in the future. So what you can see here is the style or the style sheet, the CSS file of what you see here, or the CSS part of it. Down here is the HTML part, and down here is the JavaScript part. In the next step, we will just copy these into multiple documents that are set up for our pixel streaming project. It's generally recommended to be using multiple documents whenever you develop your website. In the pixel streaming example project, this is done by having a CSS file for the style sheet, a HTML file for the look or the website itself, and a JavaScript file for the code or the scripting. So what we can start off by doing to add this slider is just start copying this part right here, which is the HTML part of this single document. You can do so by copy and then paste it in to your HTML file. Now, what I know is that just below the part where it says player, or it has a div with the ID player, it is this part right here. So what we can do is just add this directly under. And whenever I save this, without having to add anything else to the CSS and JavaScript file, a slider with the title or the name range slider picture should be right here. Now this is generally or how sliders in HTML looks by default. So if we would like it to look more like this, we need to add the style sheet text as well, which is this part after the style. We can just copy this. And if there is nothing else in the CSS file that is called slider or has the ID of slider or the class of slider, I have to say that correctly, then it should be just to paste that in to the bottom of the document, save that. Whenever you reload this website, you will now see a slider that looks more like this one. What you will notice is that this icon here is not included. And that is because it's based off a URL that is called contrasticon.png. We don't have this. This is a local link to a file on your computer. So what I tend to do is change this by using a very useful website called Iconify. So Iconify.design is really useful for just copying a lot of icons to and using it in your own website. You can do so by let's search for camera in here, because we will be changing the camera of the application, or changing the rotation of the camera. And then we have a lot of options here, and let's just have one very simple one. Look at how it looks. This looks like it's an outline, so let's have a filled image instead. This one looks good. And then you can just go into the CSS part and copy this. So you see that it says background URL, which is the same as here. And you can just, now it was copied, but you can just copy paste it into here. Let's see if I've done that correctly. Do the same with the WebKit slider thumb as well. If you save this, an icon for the thumb should now appear. Let's start off with the JavaScript next. When we set up the slider correctly here on the website, you might notice that the value down here isn't being updated, or there is no value at all. Now, you can see in the example that there is a value here, but this is because this is entirely based off the JavaScript that is taken from the slider value, or the range of this. So you can see here that we have called this, or we have named this slider or slide container myRange, or we have given it the ID myRange. Whenever I change this, the JavaScript creates, or it has created a variable called slider, which is the slider with the element ID myRange. We create yet another variable called output later that is called demo, which is later used after the value here in the HTML. Now what we want to do is, because this is just one document, it is just read through entirely and setting everything up whenever we reload the website. In our case, we would like to, just like the buttons in an earlier tutorial, we want to have an input whenever we change this value and be able to send that using the UI interaction to Unreal. Now looking at the JavaScript document again, we can create a new function. Let's have a look at how the buttons are set up. I think it's the function onConfig button right here. And you will notice that it creates a variable called descriptor that sends a category and an item value. And then it uses the emid UI interaction function that sends the descriptor value. And then in this case, it shows the descriptor value in the console log. Let's just copy this and make a new function in the bottom. And let's write it in a different way, just by using document dot let's call it on slider input. Make it into a function. And send or receive a category and an event value. For example, let's call the event E in this case. Add some curly brackets. And then we can paste the descriptor data into here. And what we would like to have from this example here is the get element by ID by myRange, because we know our slider is called myRange in the document or in the website, and it later shows the value below as demo. So we can actually just copy this part and add that to the start or to the beginning of our event. And then instead of having item like this, let's take the E, which is in this case is the slider, and make the item E dot target dot value. So it gets the value from the slider or from the event that we will be using. Now in the HTML file here, we would like to use, or whenever this value is changed, we would like to use the function on input. Like you might have seen before, or like we mentioned before, we can call on the onSlider input event by typing document dot onSlider input, and then we can feed this with, we want two values, or the descriptor is based off a category value and an item value. So an easy way to do this is just feed it with a, let's use a 4 as a category value, since we're not using 4 as a category value for these, so far I know. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3 as a category value. So let's use 4 and then just call on the event. If this is set up correctly, we should be able to save and then have a look at the website, or just reload it. Just want to inspect this and see there is something that I've written wrong somewhere. Look at this. Probably that I missed that little double quote there. Say this again. Reload. Now whenever I change this, you can see that this value is changed, as well as that the descriptor is displayed here as category and item. Now, if everything is written correctly as well here, we can go to the JavaScript and just see that because we have the Emmet UI interaction as with the buttons, this should send the category value and the item value, which is the value of the slider, to Unreal. So let's have a look at that and make a camera rotation function out of it. Now when we're in Unreal Engine, we would like to change the control rotation based on the slider that we created in the website. You can do this, or we can do a test of this first by opening the controller. In this case, it's the BP_orbit_controller, and just create a very simple function by pressing a button, let's say 1, and set or reset the control rotation. So there's a node called set control rotation, which you can split up. And let's just see, if we press 1 now, the control rotation should reset. So I'm gonna test this out. So I rotate the camera here, and then whenever I press 1, it resets. So what we would like to do is get the value from the slider and set the new rotation Z, or the yaw rotation of the camera here. So like we did, or like we watched in another or an earlier tutorial, we got the descriptor from here using the JSON event. And if the descriptor has the field name category, which we still have in the slider, it goes to change config option. And then it gets the string value of the slider, or of the descriptor. So in this case, before we just changed the environment, but now we would just like to get or change the control rotation instead. So let's do what we did before and just set control rotation down here. We can split this up. We can actually get the control rotation just so it doesn't change back to, it doesn't change the X and the Y back to 0 all the time whenever we change it. And then we can find in descriptor, we can get JSON string value. And in this case, we want the item value. And that should be converted to the yaw input. So if this works correctly, it should really just change the rotation from 1 to 100, because that's how the slider is set up. But we can just test that to begin with. So if I run this, just open up the website, reload it, be able to change this. And if I change this, you will notice that it just changes from 1 to 100. Now there are a few ways of changing this, and I would like to say that the easiest way is really just changing the value in the HTML file. So if we open that up again, so in here, you'll notice that it has a min of 1 and a max of 100. And the default value is 50. So let's say that we want the max value to be 360 degrees instead. And what is it? 180 is the middle. And just save this, reload the website. Then this should be able to rotate all the way around. If you would like this to still be 1 to 100, you could obviously just convert that in Unreal as well. I tend to use the, what is it called? Map range clamped. So in this case, if we would get a value from 1 to 100, we could just enter the value, say that the value is from 1 to 100, and then change that into, let's say, 1 to 360 instead. And feed that into the new rotation Z or Z. Compile and play this. And if I just change this value back from a max of 100 and a min of 1 and the middle value of 50 or default value of 50, save that and reload the website. It will say 1 to 100, but it will actually rotate 300 degrees. Now that I've shown you how to create your own interactive elements in the website that later can change the application itself, you might notice that whenever I interact with the application, it doesn't change anything in the website. Now, for example, you would probably, if you change a character here, you would probably want to see on the website that this character is selected. Or if I change the camera, that this little thumb is changed with it. Let's have a look at that in the next tutorial.